So my channel is not a political channel, but the political and the spiritual do intersect. So with the election around the corner, I thought I would share my feelings. First off, I am not a Trump guy. I actually opposed him in the Republican primary, so don't think I am some blind Trump sycophant. I have plenty I can say negative about the former president, but as a Latter-day Saint, I have to look at the choice in front of me and decide if I want to do good or just feel good. It might feel good to just sit out an election or vote for someone with no chance of winning, but does it actually do good? The President of the United States makes life or death decisions, and I have to face my own conscience if I didn't do something with my vote to reduce actual human suffering in the world. You see, a president's power is most powerfully manifest in the real world, not in the rhetoric, but in the policies that they implement. I vote based on policy comparisons, because those policies are what actually affect real people in real ways. So on policies that are important to me as a Latter-day Saint, how does Donald Trump compare with Kamala Harris? The nice thing is, we don't have to guess. Both have been in executive office for 4 years, and Kamala does not really seem to regret anything she and the past administration has done.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Considering how things have gone the past 4 years, I was surprised by this statement. I mean, the first area that should be important to any Christian is the subject of peacemaking and war. Has the world become safer in the past 4 years?
Kamala Harris mostly silent after bragging about her role in helping shape Joe Biden's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal.
Just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Russian troops and tanks have entered Ukraine on all fronts.
Inside Israel and Gaza.
بطلنا عارفين نمرق من شارع البحر صلاح الدين مش عارفين شو هو الطريق الآمن.
China's military says it has launched drills around Taiwan.
夜间视线不良的状况，对我军实施突击登陆。
On the other hand, during the Donald Trump administration,
Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain signed a trilateral agreement at the White House today. It was also signed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Dubbed the Abraham Accords, it formalizes the normalization of Israel's already warming relations with the two Gulf states.
Let's get straight to breaking news overnight. A historic encounter just hours ago at the DMZ, the border between North and South Korea.
President Trump shaking hands with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
They did not cut a deal to denuclearize North Korea, but they did agree to restart stalled talks.
A step towards ending one of Europe's biggest divides. After 2 days of meetings in Washington, the Serbian president and the Prime Minister of Kosovo have signed an economic deal, which hopes to increase trade between the two nations and create jobs.
You see, while it's true that Trump may have a big mouth, his policies on the foreign front were incredible. In my entire life, he is the only president who did not oversee the start of a new war. Sure, mean tweets are bad, but are they really as bad as dead bodies? There's actually a strange irony in the fact that Trump's brashness actually scared enemies into being very careful about what they did during his administration. And his constant willingness to try and make deals earned him the endorsement of many anti-war moderates, including the anti-war Democrat RFK.
If you want to avoid nuclear war, I strongly urge you to vote for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is inexperienced in foreign policy, and her belligerent and hostile remarks about Russia during her acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention were extremely alarming. Donald Trump has repeatedly said that he would negotiate with Putin to end the Ukraine war. If JFK were alive today, he would be standing side by side with President Trump on this issue. My uncle And the most important thing that we can do is to talk to our adversaries. That's why he installed a hotline in the White House and in his home at Hyannisport, so he could communicate directly with Khrushchev. A vote today for Kamala Harris is a vote for Dick Cheney.
Former Republican Vice President Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris in November. That, according to his daughter Liz, a former Republican congresswoman who has endorsed Vice President Harris herself.
It really is ironic that so many of the warmongering neocons who got us into the Iraq War are now endorsing Kamala Harris, while the anti-war Democrats like RFK are endorsing Donald Trump. On the issue of peace, Trump's tweets may have hurt feelings, but his policies created unprecedented peace and stability. And while we are talking about matters of life and death, how about abortion?
Vice President Kamala Harris avoided answering at what point in pregnancy she thinks abortion should be restricted.
What is it that you believe? I mean, what week of pregnancy should abortion access be cut off?
We need to restore the protections of Roe versus Wade.
Well, that was nebulous because it was about viability, which could be anywhere between 20 to 24 weeks.
No. Let me be very clear.
The Women's Health Protection Act that the White House also endorsed.
Let me be very clear.
The legal protections of Roe v. Wade generally forbade states from enacting abortion bans that blocked access to the procedure before the so-called age of viability, which doctors generally place between 20 and 24 weeks of pregnancy. But the Biden administration has been cagey about whether they support a ban at 20 weeks or 24 weeks or any other week.
But does it need to be specific in terms of defining and where that guarantee goes up to and where it does not, at which week of pregnancy?
We need to put back in place the protections of Roe versus Wade.
Republicans say the lack of a precise date in cutting it off. You know this.
The reality is that Kamala refuses to acknowledge the humanity of the baby at any point prior to birth, and therefore does not believe the government can ever get involved in protecting an unborn child at any point during the pregnancy. And worse, she wants to impose this on every state in the union through federal legislation.
To truly protect reproductive freedoms, we must restore the protections of Roe. Because you see, what the United States Supreme Court took, Congress can put back in place.
This should matter to Latter-day Saints.
But what impropriety could now legalize that which has been forbidden by the laws of God from the dawn of time? What twisted reasoning has transformed mythical concepts into contorted slogans assenting to a practice which is consummately wrong? It is a war on the defenseless, on the voiceless. It is a war on the unborn. For the wrath of God is provoked by governments that sponsor gambling, condone pornography, or legalize abortion.
Now, on the other hand, you have President Trump.
President Donald Trump is taking part in Washington's March for Life rally. It will be a historic moment. No president has attended the rally while in office before.
President Trump's stance on abortion is clear.
We will always defend the very first right in the Declaration of Independence, and that is the right to life.
And on Friday, he becomes the first president to appear at the annual March for Life event in Washington, D.C.
Keep in mind that Trump is the one who appointed the judges that overturned the unconstitutional Roe v. Wade decision. This simply moved the issue to the states. It now allows people in their own states to decide at what point in pregnancy abortion is justifiable. Undoing the unconstitutional Roe v. Wade decision was the only way for Latter-day Saints to even have the ability to protect life, which the church recently encouraged in a news release.
The church also reiterates its encouragement for members to be active citizens by exercising their right to vote. With respect to several current U.S. state ballot initiatives relative to abortion and the Sanctity for Life, the Church affirms that its position on abortion remains unchanged. As states work to enact laws related to abortion, church members may appropriately choose to participate in efforts to protect life and to preserve religious liberty.
Now, another matter important to Latter-day Saints is caring for the poor. Are the poor doing better under Bidenomics?
Last year, policymakers were convinced that inflation would be
transitory.
Temporary. That's a transitory thing.
But over a year later,
I think I was wrong then about the path that inflation would take.
For most of 2022, inflation lingered above 8%, a 40-year high.
This is Bidenomics. Bidenomics.
2/3 of registered voters believe the economy is getting worse.
And we are very proud of Bidenomics.
The rising gas prices, food prices really wallop the black community.
Imagine a mother who's making minimum wage trying to feed children. They're killing us without killing us.
That is called Bidenomics.
On the other hand, do you remember the economy under Trump?
The latest jobs report exceeding expectations. The U.S. economy added 263,000 jobs in April. For perspective, that's the best unemployment number since December of 1969. President Trump tweeting here, "We can all agree that America is now number one. We are the envy of the world, and the best is yet to come."
Do we really think the economy has been better under Harris and Biden than it was under Trump? Do we really think that Kamala is the one who is the better fit to improve the economy? Now, what about family and gender issues? Surely that is an issue that is important to Latter-day Saints, right?
When I was Attorney General, I learned that the California Department of Corrections, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
So not only is she a believer in trans ideology, she is perfectly willing to make it a law that we have to pay for transgender surgeries even for inmates. Now let's contrast that with President Trump.
The left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse. Very simple. Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children.
Now, what about religious liberty? That's another matter that surely is important to Latter-day Saints. Well, keep in mind that Kamala is a supporter of Obamacare, which did not make exceptions for religious liberty, even for the Catholic nuns known as the Little Sisters of the Poor.
A U.S. appeals court rules today the Little Sisters of the Poor must comply with the government's HHS mandate. It forces religious ministries to violate their faith or pay massive IRS penalties. Mother Provincial of the Little Sisters of the Poor, Sister Lorraine Marie McGuire, says, "We simply cannot choose between our care for the elderly poor and our faith."
Also, keep in mind that the First Amendment's primary goal is to protect religious liberty by granting us freedom of conscience and freedom of speech. So it was really shocking to hear Governor Walz say the following.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
What happens when my beliefs are labeled as hateful? Is my right to express my religious beliefs limited by if people think it's hateful or bigoted? I'm pretty sure the First Amendment exists specifically to protect speech that people don't like. But Kamala seems to look at free speech online as more of a privilege than a right.
He has lost his privileges, and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. The same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation, and that has to stop.
And what about immigration? You know who gets hurt the most by illegal immigration? Legal immigrants who are trying to do it right. There is a reason our leaders counsel the following.
One of our articles of faith, which represents an expression of our doctrine, states, "We believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law."
Simply put, illegal immigration is cutting in line, and it hurts the very people who are trying to do it right and are waiting in that line. Now, do we really think that Kamala is the one who is going to get control of this problem, given her record over the past 4 years?
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
And how about the Constitution and the rights we are guaranteed in it? On one hand, you have Trump, who appointed the most originalist justices in decades. And on the other hand, you have Kamala, saying the following about your Second Amendment rights.
I want to follow up to something you just said there, because as you know, I mean, the 94 assault weapons ban, it didn't apply to weapons that were purchased before 1994. Right. What would you do about the millions of, specifically, assault weapons that are already in circulation? What do you do about those?
Well, there are approximately 5 million, to your point, Craig. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
Do you know what a mandatory gun buyback is? It's a gun confiscation program. Mandatory does not mean you get to keep your guns. And Kamala is ready to take action from the top, regardless of the Constitution.
But we need leadership at the federal level, which is why I'm prepared to take executive action. And then there's no question, one of the most important responsibilities of the President of the United States is to make sure that she appoints members of the United States Supreme Court who are going to understand the Constitution of the United States in a way that is an interpretation as it relates not only to what maybe the original writers anticipated, but as it relates to today, understanding the Constitution is a living document.
Another area that is important to Latter-day Saints is racial discrimination. We really do believe in this.
Because I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
But then we have this.
I committed that if I'm elected president and have an opportunity to appoint someone to the courts, I'll appoint the first black woman to the courts. It's required that they have representation now. It's long overdue. Secondly, if I'm elected president, my cabinet, my administration will look like the country. And I commit that I will, in fact, I'll pick a woman to be vice president.
Not only are people like Biden and Harris eliminating entire races and genders from consideration for VP, the Supreme Court, and other positions, they believe this sort of racial discrimination is justified. To understand this mindset, let's consider the words of renowned Democrat scholar Ibram X. Kendi in his seminal work, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination.
Kamala is literally offering loan programs that will only be available to you if you are a certain race. Now, if we are to root out racism as our prophet has asked, I don't see how flagrant racial discrimination helps with that. This racial stereotyping is really odd. I mean, her campaign actually made this ad.
White dudes. So, I think we're all pretty sick of hearing how much we suck. Every time you go online, it's the same story. We're the problem. And yeah, some white dudes are. Trump and all his MAGA buddies are out there making it worse, shouting nonsense in their stupid red hats and acting like they speak for us when they don't. All they've ever done is screw us over. End of the day, you're your own man. It's your call. But if anyone gives you crap about it, tell them it's none of their damn business.
The reality is that most people don't know much about Kamala Harris. Most don't realize that a Newsweek analysis and other analyses showed her to be, when she was in the Senate, even more left-wing than Bernie Sanders. And that is why the people who do know her, that are traditionally more moderate, like Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, and RFK, are putting out messages like this.
Hey, everybody. A lot of people are asking me if they live in a red state or a blue state, should they still be voting for me? What about swing states? The answer is easy, no. No matter what state you live in, you should be voting for Donald Trump.
But what about Trump? Look, I am perfectly happy to point out Trump's flaws. For instance, his rhetoric is often irresponsibly hyperbolic, and he says things that make me simply facepalm. His claims about a coordinated mass election fraud in the last election is just stupid. It didn't happen. And his response to the January 6th riot was weak and slow. Though it should also be noted that the media has been very selective about what words they show from him on that day.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. You have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace.
The reality is that neither candidate in this election is without their significant flaws. On one hand, you have Trump, who in his younger years was cheating on his wife, while on the other, you have Kamala, who was sleeping with a married man to advance her career. But, and this is the key, whose policies lead to dead bodies? Whose policies help that mom afford groceries? Whose policies protect the life of the unborn? Whose policies reduce human trafficking over our border? Whose policies push back on racial and gender ideology? Whose policies are more likely to protect religious liberty and freedom of speech? The reality is that the prophet Joseph Smith was best friends with Porter Rockwell, a man known to be, shall we say, a little rough around the edges. And while rhetoric matters, Joseph understood that what a person actually does is what ultimately counts.
I love that man better, who swears a stream as long as my arm, yet deals justice to his neighbors, and mercifully deals his substance to the poor, than the long, smooth-faced hypocrite.
Anyway, I just thought these were a few good things for us to keep in mind as we prepare to cast our votes this week. But let me know what you think in the comments. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button so my future videos show up on your feed. Also, if you or someone that you know has benefited from the content here on Thoughtful Faith, please consider becoming a channel donor or volunteer by visiting my new website, thoughtfulfaith.org, and clicking on the Get Involved page.